My name is Adrian Nantchev, and this channel is all about helping you become a remarkable entrepreneur. So click on the subscribe button below and press the bell notification right next to it for the latest uploads. Now, you see, I started a podcast a few months ago, and this podcast is all about bringing people from around the world, whether entrepreneurs or not, to share with you their story and their journey and who they are and what they do. I have with me today Sam Mason. Is it Sam Mason Bell, is it?
Sam Mason Bell, yeah.
Sam Mason Bell from, I want to say Southport, isn't it? Down south?
No, it's Portsmouth.
Portsmouth, that's close. Anyway, I got Sam with me to discuss, well, you'll see what we're going to discuss. But in the meantime, Sam, please tell the world, who are you, what's your story, and why are you doing what you're doing?
My name's Sam Mason Bell. I'm a co-director of the company Trash Arts. Trash Arts are a events and film company been running for the last 10 years. I do what I do because I come from a working class background, and I didn't want to sit around and have to be educated in what I wanted to do. I wanted to keep developing and keep creating with a good community of artists who are in the same sort of boat, really.
What did you mean by you didn't want to sit around and be educated?
Well, essentially, I didn't want to go to university. I didn't want to have that kind of thing where you're being taught in a certain way of how to do things. I'd rather just go out there and make films and make a load of mistakes and learn over time and develop with other people than just doing it through an educational sort of system.
I don't understand. Why is that important to you?
It's important to me because the educational system doesn't, it gives you the foundations of how to create, but it kind of tells you how to do it in their particular structure of what they want. For example, like if you were to be examined on a particular film, you need to hit the certain criteria that they think every film should hit. Now, that's not like the point of art in my mind. Like it doesn't mean that the art could be completely right, but you should at least take the opportunity to try and do it in your own direction and see where you can go with it.
Yeah, I was watching something recently talking about how most of the box office hits these days, the big ones, the Marvel and all, the really big ones, the Warner Brothers, that if they don't get like $1 billion in the first 6 or so months or a certain threshold in Boxing Day, then it's considered a bit of a financial flop.
Well,
and it's very systemized that way.
That's it, yeah. And because the budgets are getting more and more ridiculous, including the most important bit of the budget, the marketing afterwards, which can go up to 250, 400 mil, something crazy like that. It's like they're just making things systematically to fit the criteria, especially with things like Marvel and DC with the comic books. They know they have to hit the fans, the expectations of the studios, the potential to make toys later on, all these kind of things. And a lot of people just kind of get stuck in thinking about those ideas instead of working on the creativity. That's why an interesting thing I've noticed with the box office trends at the moment is the horror genre. The horror genre seems to be thriving at the moment from low costs and originality. With more creative directors involved, audiences are more receptive to good creative films than just systematically the same thing over and over again, or at least you hope.
I remember hearing somewhere that the films are reflective of the times we live in now. So maybe this trend for horror is indicative of something. Similarly, like 10, 15 years ago, there was a massive emphasis on zombie films. And there was a bit of a breakdown of that, saying because everyone is starting to think the same way and become all the same, they're all like being like zombies. And that is epitomized in the films you watch or the films being made.
See, I can totally agree with that. That's the beauty of the horror genre itself. If you look at all of the classic horror films over time, like Night of the Living Dead, with the fears of communism and nuclear war, but also the establishment itself just drowning out anyone's opportunities. Or even like more recently, to me, Paranormal Activity is very much connected with the NSA whistleblower sort of people listening in and that kind of thing. So right now we live in a society which everyone's just kind of like, what the hell is going on all the time? So horror perfectly fits in there for us to find like, we'd rather be scared by that kind of thing. And if you look at the horror films that have come out this year, in particular, like stuff like It and stuff, it's still that invasive thing within. Nothing can be trusted. Like for me, the most terrifying thing in society right now is disinformation, and I'm very curious to see if like horror can explore that. Even to a degree, Get Out explores that with the racial tensions, but also the misinformation of why he thinks he's going there. He thinks he's welcome, but really is part of the occultist thing that they do.
Yeah, so tell me about your films, or the filming that you're making at Trash Arts, is it?
Yes, I started Trash Arts 10 years ago. We tend to just kind of go with what we want to do at the time. One of the things that we try to do is we don't sit around writing budgets or trying to get money together. We just basically look at the kind of film we're going to make and go, okay, can we do this right now? And then get a team together and make it.
Yeah, I think that's quite ambitious. Just what are you going to do? Just go out there and do it. Not mess around, not delaying, not being tenacious.
Well, this is it. And like I said, one of the key things with that is being very comfortable and humble with the fact that it might not fully work. It's just worth trying to make the film and seeing what happens from it. And I've shot 7 feature films, a bunch of web series, documentaries, and short films. And although I'm completely proud of all of them, I've learned so much from each one of them individually in the mistakes that were made within the films. It's no point thinking that, one of the problems I find with a lot of first-time filmmakers in regards to, this is my baby, this is the thing that's going to take me to Hollywood and all that. And because I made my first feature film when I was 18, I got to have that horrible realization very quickly that that's not how it works. I'm 28 now, so yes, it's given me the chance to just keep developing, keep creating, and maybe somewhere it'll go to the right sort of direction. And we've had a lot of progression in the last few years working with different distributors and stuff like that. But at the moment, it is literally just a case of keep on creating, and I'm quite enthralled to not stop making films at the moment.
Yeah, I think keep on creating is the way forward. Like these blogs, this content, writing a book at the moment on marketing and inbound marketing. And it's just a case of keep going, keep pushing the next one out, keep pushing the next one out. One of them will hit, one of them will stick. You'll learn, you'll improve, it compounds. You'll compound, comfort zone expands. You'll get there. Tell me about the moment that you realised that films are not really your baby. You said taking it to Hollywood. Tell me about that moment. What was the story? What was going through your mind when that coin dropped?
I think it was just the kind of thing that the problem with filmmaking and first-time filmmaking is if you're really enthralled by what you're doing and you haven't learned enough from others or from your own films, you end up getting the ego. And when it came to egotism, I realized very quickly that people really didn't care. And the quality of my work was nowhere near what I thought, what other people were doing. And when you get that realization of just, you have to take your film, watch other people's films, and realize that you are nowhere near any sort of height at all, because it's your first film. Your lighting's not going to be great. Your sound's not going to be great. You're not going to shoot it brilliantly, but you got to do it. If you just sit around trying to make everything perfect straight away, then I guarantee you're going to miss something at the beginning. Even if it's just a story, you could have a beautifully shot film with a perfect sound, and it might have the most incomprehensible story or the most simplest of stories that no one really cares about. So you have to take all these little things into consideration. And I think, when I made my first film, I made so many mistakes, but at first I was blindsided. I was like, this is genius. I'm a genius. I'm a surrealist master. And very quickly you realize you're not. You've just put a bunch of stuff together that other people have done the same sort of thing, but you've done it in your own style, and you don't even know what your style is yet either.
Yeah, I've come to also realize that artists, I used to be, tried to get into the games industry a few years ago, and I've come to realize that artists, once they've created something, they always critique it. They always don't look at the bright side of it. They always think, this is wrong, that's wrong, how can I improve it? It's bad, it's terrible because of X, Y, and Z.
That's the thing. I totally think that is true. And the guy I could run Trash Arts with, Jackson Batchelor, whenever he does anything with cinematography, he always has this downtrodden attitude of I could be better, better. I'm looking at it going, no, this is great. But you should have that attitude because you can only improve. Nothing is I don't think there is a perfect of going, that's perfect, there's no way to change that. If you had more money, for instance, you would definitely do things differently. But at the time, it's you want to get what's right for the film. And I definitely think you have to be critical of your own work, because if you don't, then you're just sort of stuck down this loop of arrogance and licking your own arse, really.
Could you tell me about the steps that you took to create Trash Arts?
Well, I started in college. I wanted to meet the right sort of people, to have a group of people that would want to create the same sort of art. And then from then, it was them realizing 5 years later that they weren't the right people, and getting new people involved who completely wanted to be more involved. And then just trying to essentially I don't know. It's a strange thing because at this point we just have so many different people. I like to see Trash Out's almost like an umbrella, like creative group, in regards to those people will come with us with ideas they want to do, such as we do the Black Mud's history documentaries, which is completely removed from our horror films or our comedy web shows, and yet like it was because a friend of ours who's a good documentarian wanted to do it, and we were happy to help him. I have a very much attitude that the people I work with, there is a friendship element there. And for me, if they've got an idea that's worth investing in, I will always take the time to try and invest in that idea. So it's hard to know like the actual direct free steps of how it got to this point. It was more of a case of just finding the right kind of people that want to create and work.
I don't understand. Why is that important, find the right kind of people?
Because filmmaking isn't about one person, it's about the team. In regards to pre-production, filming, and post-production, and even distribution. Because you've got, for one, you've got to sit there, and if you're going to write, edit, and direct yourself, that's fine. But there's no way you're not going to let that be shared with others to get perspective on what you've written or what you've created. So you've got that element, and then you've got the actors. No director can just walk in a room with an actor and get a good performance unless they're like absolutely amazing without having to know that person and get to know that person, have a reason for why that person's involved. It's the same with a sound man or a camera operator. You need that relationship. And the only way to develop that relationship is by realizing filmmaking isn't about it's about the team. And that's in the same regards to distributors. Creating relationships with people, like for myself, I've got a good relationship with Ron Valderrama from Stream Now TV. In regards with Ron, like I now know that we have a relationship as a friendship and a business relationship where I can go back to him and we can discuss whether he'd want, if I created something, how he'd want to market it, or if I could do additional things, like in the sense of our web show, The Making Of. We tend to do spin-offs now exclusively to Ron, and that's because that relationship's been developed. If you just dive in, going, right, I'm going to be great, this is going to be all about me, then you're in the wrong business.
Yeah, what I find interesting is distribution, because it's like 10, 20 years ago, I can't imagine the process behind it as a small independent studio. But now it's like the tech-wise and the approach is, the software is all there and the hardware, but distribution. If you're not going on places like Netflix or YouTube, then everything else, like Ron Vanderarma's platform, it's just a long tail, isn't it? Loads and loads of little small, just as independent platforms that have got some reach.
But this is the thing, and I think that's a really beautiful thing, because independently, I can live in Portsmouth and work with people internationally who are all trying to do the same thing, trying to create the right sort of thing with a scene. And it's not like Ron's doing it to push artists as well as he's pushing his own platform. The other companies work with, like Versus Media, they're doing the same thing. And I like to have different relationships with different distributors because there's a variation of work, and also it's more interesting to work with different people. With our horror films, we work with Troma Entertainment and WWMM. And again, they both work in completely different ways. And I thought I was going to be having to like just constantly go to festivals and having to pay out money and trying to get people interested through festivals. But when you realize independent distributors will take risks, and that's the most important thing, because one of the golden things they always say about the studio system in Hollywood is they don't take risks anymore. There are no risks. They won't fund something where there's no stars or anything like that, which again makes sense on an economic level, but not on an art level. So although independent distributors are trying to get their name up to that status, they know they have to take the risks. And that's why I think it's important.
Yeah, life is all about risks. You're not taking any risks. You're in the doing doing nothing, doing an ordinary life and getting ordinary results.
Definitely.
There's a side note. In the future, I'm planning on writing fiction once I finish this non-fiction book, and when it's a priority in this time and all the rest, to start writing some fictional works. And it's going to be a creative risk, but just pushing stuff out there. Kind of what you said earlier, just pushing stuff out there constantly, seeing what sticks, seeing what works, and then discovering that voice, that pattern, that style, which is, I've done some research onto it, but it's like, we'll get onto it later on. So I'm very curious then, what in the UK, what is the situation like, the industry as it is with regards to independent films and in the British film industry?
Well, I think one of the things which is causing quite a bit of problem is the monopolization of festivals by the universities, because it makes total sense, of course. You know, filmmakers go from university, the government pays to universities, everyone's happy. But at the same time, it stops you from like being able to enter festivals because students will get the best kind of equipment. Now, if I'm totally honest with you, like I said, I'm working class. I don't earn a lot of money monthly. Money doesn't have that much significance to me because all I want to do is create. But I don't like the idea of entering a festival where they'll look at what I've shot and go, well, if only it was on a slightly expensive more camera, then maybe we'll have more of an interest in it. That in regards is insane. So when you escape that kind of going out of the standard way of the festivals, especially in this country, in the UK, and just do it independently, you find actually things are really small. And I've through horror anthologies and through other things like that, you just see all these little producers and filmmakers across the UK who are all doing the same thing, reaching out internationally, especially the horror directors. I work with a guy called Tony Newton, who's a fantastic producer, who essentially sets up horror anthologies internationally with companies and gets mostly UK-based filmmakers across with it. And again, it's just about pushing the art. And you realize just like to stay away from the establishment of go the festival route, do it that way, do it this, make sure you tick all the boxes. It's just not necessary anymore. And I think that kind of applies into the whole world philosophy of a lot of people's kind of just like completely bewildered by how society's working right now. It's like, if you want to make your own success, you have to try and do it a different way. You can't try and do it the way you're supposed to. Otherwise, you're just standing in line with everybody else.
I'm just very curious about one thing you mentioned just there. You talked about how the people say that if you use the more expensive camera, they'd have more of an interest in you. Is that because they just want to look at the numbers behind the film, or that they're not sophisticated enough, or they're too naive enough, or they don't understand the artistic value of the film? You know, how people say, oh, this film is an analogy for that, or this film is an allegory for this event, or this means this, or the hidden meaning, or the hidden symbolism, or the hidden structure, or what it means in a much more esoteric way.
I think in some ways it's like the annoying thing with art. Sometimes you get pretensions, and if I'm honest with you, I run a film festival called Making Waves Film Festival, and you watch a load of films constantly. And if something is shot at a lower quality, you don't want it to affect you, but it does, because you're expecting a standardized version of film in some regards. So like when it comes to that attitude of art, where if it was shot on an Ariel Extra, I'd give you 20 million or something crazy like that. It's just like, it makes no sense, but it does make a lot of sense at the same time, because sadly, anyone who watches something like that is always thinking about the audience, and audiences will watch anything, but they still, the studios still believe they won't. Like, I know that if I screen, well, not even screen a film, but I know that if there's an online film, if people are enjoying the story, they'll watch it. They won't care about the camera quality, but the industry still believes that's the way it is. It's very much like a snobbery attitude that goes beyond just the discussion of film versus digital, of just like what is quality. And you're right, could there be an allegorical film that was shot on a mobile phone? Can that happen? And the answer is yes, of course it can happen. But it's just it's going to take a long time for people to accept that. Although there is a massive difference between a film that has not shot well, poor sound, poor lighting, that's just bad filmmaking. There is definitely a differentiation between those two, of just not having the perfect equipment but making the best out of it and still making a great film, and having equipment and just not knowing how to use it properly.
So I'm curious then, what is the first thing that comes to mind when I say the word failure?
Failure, I think, is can be self-determined, because, like I said, any film you should go in with the idea of like, right, I'm going to make this film. If things don't go well, that's not failure, that's learning. Whereas self-determination of failure is when, if you had a direct aim with the film and you completely missed the boat, then I'd say that was a failure. I think other people's definitions of failure is, if they say, oh, that film's a failure, it's completely subjective in that regards, you know? So many people can be bogged down by that idea of just being like, well, my friends didn't like it, so it can't be that good. When the reality is that you're not aiming at that small audience. You're trying to get out to a massive audience. And hell, everybody might hate it, but that's life, you know? You go on to the next one. It's not failure. Failure drills into your head that you shouldn't do this again, because why would you want to fail again? And that's not right. It shouldn't be seen as failure. It should be seen as just, you know, you made a mistake, learn from that mistake, don't do it again in the next film you make.
And what's one mistake that you are actively trying to avoid when making the next films?
I think it's all the small things. Each feature film, I'll watch it at this point and just go, the sound wasn't great there. Okay, next time I need to make sure that I focus on the sound. Or you're doing an edit and you're looking at it going, I didn't really cut that. That could have done with a beautiful transition. Okay, next time make sure it's transition. It's little things like that. And because we do so many different projects at once, you kind of catch up with it quite quickly. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of reshooting, but that's more because, again, a budgetary sort of thing. When you don't have any money at all, reshooting is just incredibly difficult. So I'd rather be able to go, okay, I'm gonna make sure I don't do that mistake again. That might be quite a simple way in explaining it, but I just think that's like, I just can't, at this point, that's the only way I can do it, you know?
Yeah, I heard a quote by Morgan Freeman talking about how the director should just tell the actor what his lines are, where he should stand, and where he should finish standing, and then everything else is down to the actor, whether it's script or method or whatever. Everything's down to the actor, not interfere with the creative process or not interfering with the actors or other people from doing their job.
See, I don't fully agree with that, simply because it depends on the kind of script. For instance, our web shows, the making of Right Here, Right Now, are improvised. And with improvisation, the actor needs to put a lot more in, like as Morgan Freeman says there. But if it was a scripted film, then that script is already there. That character is already in place. The actor is then interpreting that character and doing what they can with it. But I genuinely think it really depends on the sort of film. I say this to a lot of people, like with a lot of different formats of film. They're like, yeah, but why do you always make just improv films? I'm like, well, no, I don't just make improv films. It depends on the material that we're trying to do. If you're doing a mockumentary series about filmmakers and it's a comedy, it's a lot more beneficial to work within improvisation than to script it, in my personal experience, you know?
All right, so also in your personal experience then, what belief do you have that, or thing you take for granted that other people think will be crazy or insane?
I think the belief I have is just to keep doing things without worrying about money. Because like there's a standard, in my perspective at least, some people have the standardization that they need to have security before they can create. And that's when it turns into a hobby. So if you've got, I don't know, like bills or anything like that, you can be like, well, okay, that's what I need to focus on. I kind of made the crazy decision to go, right, I'm going to be self-employed and I'll happily be poor as long as possible to be able to make and create and to never stop doing what I'm doing until maybe the position where someone goes, hey, give this guy some money, give this guy, a job. But at this point, that's not my priority. My priority is just to keep making films. And I think it takes a lot to do that. And it scares a lot of people just to go, all right, cool. I'm going to accept that maybe for a couple of years I might live on a sofa for a bit and maybe I'll find some security at home. But I don't care because I'm just going to keep making films. And to some people that can be seen almost like insane, if anything. But that's the kind of thing that I decided to do like 10 years ago. And now like 10 years later, I'm in a comfortable place where I'm going, actually, yeah, it actually was worth it, you know? Not like in a financial sense.
Say again, please.
Oh, not like in a financial sense. I mean in the sense of like the security of the connections and even just like being in a more consistent home where I can just constantly work like I do.
How do you go about not worrying about money? And before you answer that, my angle on that is because I have faith in that. I know that what I'm creating through that low reciprocity or simply pushing something and putting things into the universe, it'll come back to me tenfold at a much later date.
I almost completely agree with you. And it really is like that because it is the kind of thing where if you're just constantly creating and the quality's there, and I'm really difficult with talking about the quality of work because I'm worried about the concept of arrogance. But at the same time, I can appreciate that people value what we do. And that's it. And also, like, one of the key things with having a career in filmmaking is filmmaking isn't about money, it's about legacy. And if you've already shot like 8 feature films and done a bunch of web shows, documentaries, short films, anything like this, you already have a legacy in place. That is something to already be proud of. You've already put your stamp on the independent film scene. And I think that's one thing people like totally forget about sometimes, that you've already created your legacy. You know, just keep it going, keep the quality going. It's not about being in, you know, like the top 10 directors of all time. That's a nice little thing if you really are that arrogant that you can get to that point. But in reality, it's more about just having your own legacy that you're proud of and it's part of the film scene.
Interesting, because when I say and think legacy, I'm thinking about what kind of like financial estate can I create, or what kind of difference and ripple and dent in the world can I make that people are going to talk about in my obituary and after I've passed away, and 100 years after I've passed on. What difference and dent in the universe and the world will I make? But also at the same time, there's that thing which is YOLO, you only live once. This is indeed true, but what legacy and difference do you leave behind? Legacy, as I said, legacy in terms of the world, but also in your own estate. Like, what do you leave behind for your next generation or all of your children? What do you leave behind for the future? That's the way I see it as well. Legacy.
Yeah, well, this is the thing, and there was a film director in Portsmouth called Michael J. Murphy, and Michael J. Murphy did he did a lot of video nasties in the 80s and a lot of fantasy films, and he died 2 years ago, and I never knew him at all, but I went to a few talks and met a few of his actors and started working with those actors. Now, this was a guy who was educated. He crewed 2001: Space Odyssey, but he hated how the studios worked. And he died working a part-time job and had made 30 feature films. But the legacy's still there. And the fact that he had this legacy and he kept creating films, and he just didn't care. He just kept making films. And he had distribution deals with video nasty companies and things like that. It makes me think of, like, in my city in particular, Portsmouth's a very competitive city for no real reason whatsoever. So when you have people like Michael J. Murphy who has this legacy, it's really important for me. And it creates an impact and an influence. So whenever I think of legacy, I think, well, he had that. And obviously I want to be able to do more than what he did, but to know that's there and something I didn't know about, and to see that whole entire career there just in my own city, that's what I mean by legacy, if anything.
Yeah, you said it's competitive down there. In what way is it competitive?
In a competitive sense of, I always believe that if you're going to create a scene out of a city, then it has to be a selection of filmmakers emerging. It's not one artist that creates a scene, it's a bunch of people working together that do that. And the problem is with this city is it has a very, I don't know, sometimes it can completely work with each other and something great can be created. But generally speaking, there's a very much a us-them sort of scenario, and it becomes unnecessary. And I think that's a problem with any independent art, is that you're always going to be like, right, we've got to be in competition with each other because that's what the system tells us. Instead of going, right, let's work together. You could direct this, and you could direct that, and you could write that. That'd be great. I think that's one of the things I learned with web series. If you get different directors involved in a web series, it's interesting to see different visions, but also, like I said, short films and feature films, if you want to be perfect, you need to have the money, you need to have all that stuff. A web show, if you're just directing it, you're learning how to work with a team. And I think that's one of the things, like in Portsmouth, there needs to be more teamwork. And it can happen, and there are little film groups that try to get this to come across. It's just removing that thing of going, right, well, you're at this standard, I'm at this standard, so we can never talk to each other. We are not in a position in our lives to be thinking about that. There's already class issues in the world. We don't need to be doing it on status of quality of work,
And speaking of the city and great content, do you remember a few years ago in 2010, there was this project on YouTube called, I forgot what it's called actually, but it was, everyone had 6 months or so. What they're going to do is on a single day in the world, like in August or September, everyone will record their content for the day and submit it. And there's this massive montages collection.
Ridley Scott.
Beg pardon?
Ridley Scott produced it with Kevin McDonald, Life in a Day. That's
the one, Life in a Day, yes. Yeah. What are your thoughts on things like that, or collaborations? And you talk about the city, you talk about great content. That's something I thought about as well, because interesting concept called Sonder, where everyone's life is infinitely complicated as our own. And I'd never come across that kind of video production before, where it's everyone in the world, what's happening. And I watched some clips of people in Mongolia, they were tending to their milk and tending to their goats and stuff like that. And it's where in a single day, yeah, everyone's got a story.
That's the thing, yeah. Like I kind of felt the same with that, and it made me think of with anthology horror films. And the first anthology horror film I got involved with was called 60 Seconds to Die, and there are 70 directors in that, and they've all got 1 minute long films. And in a weird way, that's kind of similar to Life in a Day. It might not be on the prolific, you know, this is life, this is society all around us, but it's still like small forms of art coming together to create a bigger thing. And in a weird way, I mean, I might be wrong in this phrasing, but anthology horror almost is the same approach of having a scene. Because an anthology horror is 7 different filmmakers coming together to create something great. And if in regards to what I said before about the scene, in the sense that it needs to be a selection of filmmakers coming up together, not just one person, horror anthology kind of gives you that benefit of doing that. And I think those sort of projects are quite interesting. I've done, because I entered through Tony, I did about 8 horror anthologies before I decided to produce my own one. And I decided to do a locally focused one through the film festival that I run, called Maniacal, which got a distribution deal and comes out later next year. But it was kind of cool just to see how that could work with local filmmakers and being able to screen it locally, and knowing that if they needed help with actors or cinematographers or editors, just going, right, I know this guy's great, why don't you work with him? This actress is brilliant, this actor's great. And just getting everyone together and getting those opportunities out. Because that's another thing. I find, like, I don't work with a lot of actors who have agents or who go to well, not university, but go to like acting school and stuff. I know a lot of actors who work at Tesco and who are absolutely fantastic and brilliant, but just don't see that they're ever going to succeed outside of like that. So it's like, you're a brilliant actor, I'm going to offer you opportunities, and I'm going to meet other directors, and I'm going to suggest you for all these different kind of roles. And I think that's really important. Like, it doesn't matter that you're working with similar people or that other people work with similar people that you work with, because isn't everyone supposed to get out there and get the opportunity to work, to be able to do their art? And some actors just don't get the chance because people are too focused on signing to the agent and making sure that they've got the top standard that might not be a bit strange and a bit different, you know, like trying to sit in with the fashion. And something like horror anthologies or Life and Day thing, it gives that opportunity for all those little factions to have a little, I don't know, like a spotlight on them, essentially.
Mm. So as we slowly wrap up this podcast, Sam, what is next for you, and what are you working on now?
As usual, too much. But we've been shooting a feature film started last week called Fixer, which is all about crime and corruption in a fictional city council sort of scenario, like in Portsmouth, but obviously fictional. So we started developing on that last week. We're trying to we're going to have a Right Here, Right Now Halloween special next week, along with the Making of Halloween special. So we're just trying to keep those things constantly flowing. And what else do we have? There's like some more horror films coming out. We're going to release some more horror anthologies. The Making Waves Film Festival's main screening event is in Portsmouth next month. So it's keeping that constant rotation of things. How I see it is, I'm self-employed. I've got to keep myself busy every day and keep things constantly moving. So yeah, it's hard to focus on what one thing we have. But Fixer is our main focus at the moment as far as feature films.
But then what I don't understand then is, you're making these horror-related films, okay? Who's the audience? And you're reaching them purely through distribution, but the audience, how do you know there's going to be a viewer at the other end?
That's
of all this putting all this logistics and effort into something. How do you know someone's going to pay? You know, bums on seats. You know, total addressable market. The audience. That's what I don't quite computate.
Well, that's the thing, because horror, you never have to worry about that. Horror always has an audience. Horror is a determined audience because everybody feels fear, and it depends on how good you are at scaring people. Whereas something like Right Here, Right Now, the comedy web show that we do, which is about politics and satire, I can't say that word. It's basically a podcast, and it's all about there's different social and economic issues of what's going on in the world, and then people discussing it and arguments forming. That kind of thing, I don't get the greatest numbers for, but I don't care because it's once a month, and it's almost like a release of. So let's say last month we discussed sexual harassment, and that's because I was reading a lot about Harvey Weinstein, and it kind of I wanted to write about it, and Right Here, Right Now gives that opportunity to do it through some comedy. The horror has got us more of an interest because we've got distribution companies releasing it on like DVD and VOD and stuff. But the comedy stuff, like, is really more hit and miss, but I don't care. What's the point of caring of like, well, if I put all this effort in, will anyone watch it? Because you're just not going to know until you try, you know? Like the rethinking documentaries at this point, they are currently our most successful things on like YouTube, for instance. But they get 40,000, 200,000 hits or whatever. But then on Versus Media, our films from 5 years ago are still getting like 20,000 hits a year. So it's really a case of just you got to create and see where it goes afterwards. Like some things aren't going to get the immediate response you expect. You shouldn't expect that, especially with these history documentaries. Our first Egypt documentary did about 8,000 in about a year. And then all of a sudden over the summer, it jumped to 200,000. And it was just because of the peak interest at that particular time.
Interesting. Horror as well. That makes sense as well, because every now and then we see these adverts in the back of buses or anywhere else. We see adverts, and it's just new horror film coming out, a new horror film, The Conjuring or whatever the heck else there is. And it's like, another horror film? Really? I'll never watch it. You know, like what we're on, like Saw 5 or something? A new Saw film coming out? And it's like, well, yeah, it makes sense actually. Horror always sells. And like, interesting little, interesting.
I mean, John Carpenter said it best. John Carpenter said that horror is the one genre that will never die because people will always want to be scared.
Wait, who said that?
John Carpenter.
John Carpenter. Horror will never die.
Yeah, it's true. If you look at like westerns, crimes, fantasy films, sci-fis, they survive by keeping the ideas of it but applying it to another genre. Whereas horror is probably the one thing that is constantly, mostly pure. In regards to it's always horror, it always has an end game. But you could get like a sci-fi western or that kind of thing, and you just don't see, you know, just standardized westerns nowadays that make money. It's a very rare thing.
Interesting concept. And when you say like westerners and the spin on the genre, are you talking about things like Firefly? That's what comes to mind straight away.
Yeah, that would be a spin on the genre, but I'd even say like, well, to a degree, No Country for Old Men is still a western, or Hell or High Water, which came out last year, it's still a western. But you can't be the standardized western because when Hollywood created westerns, it was very much, you know, calling Native Americans Red Indians, and like it was all about glorifying that Americanized dream. But that's why I love like revisionist westerns a couple of years later. I think that's important with a lot of culture, is that revisionist idea. And I think that's the thing with horror. There is always something to be scared of. It's just going to change what it is. You can revise what that horror element is, but there is still going to be fear. Whereas a western, the key elements come from American folklore, which is already being like biased and like almost working as propaganda. So like, yeah, I've gone on a bit of tangent there, but
that's all right. Interesting, very interesting stuff. When you say the spin on genre, what comes to mind then is Dances with Wolves, Kevin Costner.
Yes. Yeah.
That comes to mind. Also, a lot of I forgot his name now. Oh, you know, I can picture his face. I forgot his name. Typical Western actor. I forgot his name, but that's okay. Yeah, interesting. Constantly spin the genre and horror. Yeah, I agree with that as well. People like to be scared. I personally don't really like horror very much. It's just like, no, I can handle it, but it's just scare. You know, like Evil Dead with Aston. I forgot his name now as well. But Evil Dead, where it's like just shock in your face all the time. But Evil Dead 3, the Army of Darkness, that's quite funny because it's a bit comedy as well, which is bearable. But shock is like, no, I don't like that. It's like, what is this? Just typical cheap, feels cheap. But all the rest, like the mental stuff or the suspense, like a good suspense that I saw 2 years ago was Gone Girl.
Yeah.
What about suspense then? Because isn't suspense like a subset of horror, where it's keeping the edge? Because horror is like you're taking away the power, so people feel powerless, therefore they have no control of the situation. But suspense is like, what the heck is going on here?
Well, I think that's where the difficult thing of like, what's a horror and what's a thriller? Because a thriller to me fits more the suspense element. Because Gone Girl's got horror elements, but really it's a thriller. Because there is that suspense. It is used slowly, a story kind of, I suppose it's that mystery element as well. It's just slowly like coming apart kind of thing. Like especially with Gone Girl, of like the diary and different pieces. But then suspense, like in a sense of Psycho or something like that, that's very suspenseful and you're on the edge of your seat. I don't know, it's really difficult to find a line, and in a weird way, like, genre doesn't really need to matter. Like, there shouldn't be a focus on genre in that regards, but at the same time, people like to box things in. It's a lot easier, especially when you're selling stuff, I guess.
Yeah, that's psychology, what's called a schema, where we just like to, rather than describing something as all these different words, we just categorize it. It's much easier to process in our brain. Because I was thinking then, as you're talking, I was thinking mystery. Mystery is very popular, but then you said it doesn't matter on the genre, it matters on the quality or the content or the storytelling. And it's like, I was thinking about this earlier, it's like the hero's journey or the scenes and the beats and things like that, and the screenplay and all that kind of stuff. Save the cat, all those kind of things. Like, yeah, that's where it really is all about, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what kind of genre or beginning, middle, and end, because they all work. It's just really, it's like the software. It doesn't matter if you use Houdini or whatever or After Effects. It's what you can do with it and what you can't do with it.
Exactly, and I think you can only learn that by doing it. That's the only way to do that.
Yeah. But as we wrap this up, then, what's the best way for the audience to get in touch with you, Sam?
If anyone wants to get in touch, email on trashartsportsmouth@gmail.com, or via Facebook, the Trash Arts Group, or through Twitter again, Trash Art Films, or myself, Sam Mason Bell, on either Facebook or Trash Arts. We're always interested in getting new people involved. It makes so much sense to see different creative voices coming through and being able to develop what they want to do. So yeah, people are always welcome to get in touch.
Yeah, cool. I'll include those links in the show notes below.
Excellent. Oh, and yeah, Trash Arts Portsmouth on YouTube. Probably should include that too.
That's all right. That's pretty cool. I'll include those. But Sam, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
No problem. Thank you very much for inviting me.
It was really good talking to you.
Have a lovely day.
You too.